Okay, now I want to dive into some of the big ones. First one I want to tackle is my body, my right. There's this notion that a person could do whatever they want with their body. Now, to the Christian, this is not even up for debate. 1 Corinthians 6:18, avoid sexual looselessness like the plague. Every other sin that a man commits is done outside his own body. But this is an offense against his own body. Have you forgotten that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who lives in you, and that you are not the owner of your own body? You have been bought, and at what a price! Therefore bring glory to God both in your body and your spirit, for they both belong to Him. Even in the context of marriage, notice this passage from 1 Corinthians 7:4. The wife has not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband has not power over his own body, but the wife. So the Bible doesn't endorse my body, my right. Now, most husbands will not do well by saying to their wife, "Hey, hon, I'll be back in a few hours. I got this girlfriend on the side. Oh man, she's so great in bed. And I'm just repeating what you said. I have a right to do what I want with my own body, right?" Have you considered using your foot to press down on the accelerator and do 90 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone? And then when the police officer pulls you over and sees how he reacts to, "I can do whatever I want with my body." So even if it's your body, there are consequences that come along with doing what you want to do. Second, an unborn child is it really the woman's body? We need to rethink this. A woman's body makes eggs. The purpose of an egg is very different than all other cells in her body. All other cells in her body are made to support the woman's body and to reproduce things concerning the woman's body, but the cell does not. Now, a woman's body does not produce sperm, and thus any sperm that is found in a woman's body is also not of her body. Neither was it produced from her body. A woman's body automatically will surrender and give up the right to one and only one cell in her body, and that cell is the egg. That one egg will allow that which is not part of her body, a sperm, to interact with that cell, with that egg, since the woman's body gave up ownership to it. As the sperm penetrates that one egg, there is a reaction that results in a new cell that neither the woman's body nor a man's body can reproduce or has of itself. Thus, you at that stage are not part of the woman's body or the man's body, but you are a new human being. That new cell is you when you were in your mother's womb. It is impossible that the new cell, which is you, existed as part of the woman's body, because a woman's body cannot produce a cell with a DNA that is different than her own. The same goes for the man. Not only that, but the cell will have many distinct features that are completely different from the woman's body. It will have its own DNA, maybe a different blood type, its own unique fingerprints, feet, hands, heart, and brain, etc. As the Bible states, the two shall become one. They are no longer twined, but one flesh. A husband and a wife come together and become one flesh. Now, part of that desired outcome is the act of becoming one literal cell that was produced from two individuals into one new flesh, otherwise known as a child. Just as there's an ambassador in a foreign land that's supposed to protect someone else that represents another country, so it is in the womb. The womb is supposed to be the safe haven. Though it is foreign to the woman's body, it should be treated like an ambassador, should be protected under the care of its mother until the child is ready to leave. So my body, my right is a lie, since the DNA of the unborn child is not the same DNA as the woman's body, and thus one should not be allowed to do whatever one wants to with another body that just so happens to be connected to their mother's body. Just like an IV that is connected to a person's body and yet is not part of that person's body, so will the unborn child be connected to the woman's body in order to mature properly. Next, here's the big one. It's a legal right. Now, basically the Supreme Court's decision was that abortion is a constitutional right for 4 reasons. 1, the right of privacy. 2, not enough historical foundation to restrict abortion. 3, can a fetus survive outside the womb? And 4, the question of personhood. Before I even tackle the most surprising thing that I learned when reading the court's opinion on abortion was this: when does life begin? Check out this quote. This really got me. We need not resolve the difficult question when life begins, when those trained in their respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus. The judiciary at this point in development of man's knowledge is not in a position to speculate as to the answer. End quote. Notice biology was blatantly left out. For by it we know when new life begins. Quote, there has always been strong support for the view that life does not begin until live birth. End quote. Wow. I mean, that is a claim, but where is the evidence to support that claim? Quote, in areas other than criminal abortions, the law has been reluctant to endorse any theory that life as we recognize it begins before live birth, or to accord legal rights to an unborn except in narrowly defined situations, and except when the rights are contingent upon live birth. End quote. Wow. Talk about nonsense, folks. The court's opinion states we need not resolve when life begins, since there's not a consensus when life begins in respective fields, blah, 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 blah. Yet, the Supreme Court claims there's good support that life begins at live birth. So, the support that life begins at live birth is... Quote, so we need not resolve when life begins. End quote. Seriously? Folks, think this through. In order to kill something, referring to abortion, doesn't someone have to be alive before that someone could be killed? We will get to this shortly, but another point which I will also discuss is the Supreme Court asked this question, quote, can the fetus survive outside the womb? End quote. Notice, according to the dictionary, the word survive means to, quote, remain alive or in existence, live on. Now, really, just think this through. How can the court argue that life begins at live birth in one point of their opinion, and then state in a different point of their opinion they would ask the question about whether the fetus can survive outside the womb? For if the word survive means to remain alive, then the court unknowingly is admitting that the fetus is already alive while in the womb. You may be thinking, how so? Well, what would be the point to ask, can this fetus survive or remain alive unless it was already alive to begin with? To those that would say what is meant is when a child is born, will they be able to survive on their own? To me, is no different if one had a major surgery and once the surgery was done, the patient was not brought to the recovery room but was put in a wheelchair and taken out of the hospital. Think about that. You have a major operation. We don't ask, well, we're not sure if they could survive unless they stay in a recovery room for a while. We don't do that. Why do we do it for the unborn? So, how about we speculate how something that not supposedly alive with a completely different DNA in the womb grows from a speck to nearly 2 feet long, but it's not alive until live birth? Then how do you explain that the unborn child is the one that begins the birthing process if it's not alive? How does someone have a heartbeat but it's not alive until live birth? How does one explain birth defects when a mother uses certain drugs or other harmful substances if the child is not alive? If those drugs do nothing to a dead person, then how does it affect the unborn child if the unborn child is not alive? If we cannot determine when life begins, then how do we determine when life ends? If we have a method by which we can determine when one dies, how come there's nothing to determine when life begins? The Apostle Paul said, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Actually, I think it's easy to determine when a new human life or organism begins. Though some may argue that life is a continuum, what I am speaking of is a distinct new human organism. Each of us have our own unique DNA that did not exist before. The sperm that penetrated the egg that in turn produces the new organism. Since 2 dogs will only produce a dog, 2 cats will produce a cat, then 2 humans can only produce a live human being. If one were to take the DNA sample from a new organism, it would prove what type of being it is. The test would reveal it to be a human being. Yet to state that this new organism is not alive is contrary to biology's definition of life. Normally, to determine if one has died, do we consult in the respective fields of medicine, philosophy, and theology to determine if one has died, or we simply see if they have a heartbeat? Medical personnel can determine that, so at the minimum, when there is a heartbeat, we know that we have a living unborn child. Yet, not all living beings have a heart from its beginning, and some will never develop a heart. That is where biology comes in. All higher forms of life must have 7 qualifications, according to biology, in order for it to be considered alive. Living things are composed of cells. We are all a clump of cells. Living things have different levels of organization. They all use energy. They respond to their environment. They grow, they reproduce, they adapt to their environment. Thus, the state that no one really knows is rejecting what biology has already determined to be true and shows no regard for human life. Final thought. Tell me, is it correct to say that a woman is 25% pregnant? I don't think so. Either she is or she isn't. Neither should a human being be considered 13, 25, 75% alive or human in the womb. The baby's first breath out of the womb is not when their life begins, any more than when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. In both cases, they are alive and change rapidly and in seclusion before they come out of their protective covering into the world. Okay, the next one, the right of privacy. Quote, the Constitution does not explicitly mention any right of privacy, end quote. Wow, that's how they start off their premise on such a weak foundation. Quote, in a line of decisions, however, going back to perhaps as far as Union Pacific, the court has recognized that a right of personal privacy or guaranteed of certain areas or zones of privacy does exist under the Constitution, end quote. Basically, the court is declaring that abortion is such a deep personal decision by a woman that the Constitution is broad enough to include the area of abortion, even if it's not mentioned. Can someone have like hundreds of cats just to torture them as long as it's done in private? Can an abusive husband beat up his wife daily and claim it's his right to privacy? Can a woman be raped and the guy claim, that's my right to privacy? In fact, can one own a slave in the United States today and claim it's a right of privacy? After all, at one time, slavery was legal. Whether something is done in private does not automatically mean it's morally right. To kill, to rape, to terrorize in private is not found in the Constitution. In this case, private or not, how is the premeditated killing of an innocent human life solely based on the fact that the unborn child still exists, even found in the mindset of our founding fathers who stated, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights," end quote. Since the unborn is already living and was already created by a Creator, then they are already endowed by their Creator with rights. Whatever so-called right that denies the right to life from their Creator is not a constitutional right, but an attempt to usurp the authority of the Constitution itself. To all those that reject the Bible, existence of God, let me remind you that the Constitution was set up under the assumption of a Creator who gives us rights. If you want to argue that the assumption of the existence of God is not valid in this discussion, and you are free to argue that the Constitution is flawed, since it's based on that premise. However, how can you argue that abortion is a constitutional right, but reject the authority on which the whole Constitution itself derives its power and authority from? If you willingly reject the authority on which the Constitution is based on, then by what authority does a woman have the right to kill her unborn child? For any reason or at any time, and why should I accept that authority? As I will argue later on, the Bible speaks of why we are not to kill. We are made in the very image of God. Yet to those that do not believe in God, on what basis does anyone have the right outside of the government, which takes their authority from the Constitution? Next, no historical foundation of abortion restriction. Basically, the court's opinion looked at the history from the Persians, Roman Empire, Greece, as well as the common law and our history. Since abortion did exist throughout history, then why should it be restricted now? This is one of the poorest arguments I have ever heard. Shall we then say, since slavery existed throughout history, then why should it be restricted now? We have laws based on the Constitution and not whether the Persians did something or not. After all, many of those nations had no issue with crucifixion, hanging, and raping women. Are we to go and do likewise? At the time of the court's decision, there were nearly 200 years of restrictions in a majority of states in the Union. So how in the world did the court consider that when 46 states had restrictions on abortions at the time of the Roe v. Wade decision, since the majority of the states had restrictions on abortion, then how did the court consider no historical foundation of abortion restriction as a prime reason to allow an elective-induced abortion? The job of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution. So where in the Constitution is the mother given a right to kill her unborn child at any moment and at any time? The court actually stated, quote, "The Constitution does not explicitly mention any right of privacy," end quote. So the court's decision is theirs, but it's not the Constitution's decision. Neither should it be considered as one. Next, can the fetus survive outside the womb? What has this to do with anything? How is it if an unborn child is born 2 months premature, will now have a right to live at the time of this decision that the same unborn child wouldn't if the same unborn child stayed in the womb the full 9 months? How can a 7-month-old unborn be more developed than an unborn of one that's 9 months? So, if someone was in a terrible car accident and in critical condition, should it be illegal for them to get artificial aid? Or is there a double standard here at play, folks? Quote, that the woman's right to is absolute and that she is entitled to terminate her pregnancy at whatever time, in whatever way, and for whatever reason she alone chooses, end quote. Here the judge has declared that the woman gets to play God and has given room for the woman to usurp authority over the man, as stated in 1 Timothy 2:12. And I'm going to cover that later on when I talk about the scriptures and the subject of abortion. Why even mention if a baby can survive outside the womb as criteria for gaining rights if a woman still has the right to kill the baby and is absolute? The baby was not meant to live outside the womb until it's ready. That's the way the Creator designed it. Just like an adult is not meant to leave a hospital after a major operation. This is a huge double standard. An adult will stay in a recovery room until they are ready to do so. There's a truck driver once told me that he was out of work for 7 months after having surgery on his shoulder. In fact, if you were to add up the recovery time for heart surgery, hip, knee, back, and all these other major surgeries, it's got to be over 9 months of recovery time, and yet the unborn will grow and develop in all these areas while in the womb, which is like a recovery room. Yet the audacity to treat a baby with such disrespect and say unless it can survive outside the womb, it doesn't have rights as others who recover under the care of a doctor, it's just beyond me. Notice a full-grown adult that might have been in an accident would never even consider to pull their IV out and tell them unless you can survive without an IV or blood transfusion, you have no rights. What about those who are hooked up to a dialysis machine? Should those and others' rights to live be taken away? So is the recovery time only okay to those that are born? The unborn that grow from a single cell and then develop every organ in their human body in 9 months can be treated like taking out the trash, is a mindset that to me, I simply don't get. By the way, see what happens if you smash some bald eagle eggs and get caught. I assure you it won't be pretty. Now, under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, the first criminal offense is the misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison and $100,000 fine for an individual, $200,000 for an organization. The second offense becomes a felony with a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison, $250,000 fine for individuals, $500,000 for an organization such as a business. The Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act also provides for a maximum civil penalty of $5,000 for each violation. Now, in September 2005, a Florida land development company responsible for the destruction of an eagle's nest on property where it was building a housing development pleaded guilty, and they had to pay $356,000. One of the largest penalties ever. Now, I believe the bald eagle should be protected since it is our national bird. One may argue that yes, it's an endangered species and deserves our protection, but the unborn is not. Any unborn is endangered if its own mother wishes to kill it at any time with the full backing of the U.S. government. Newsflash, the Constitution was written for humans and not for eagles. Would the Supreme Court use the same standard on the killing of an unborn bald eagles? Before we cover the last point of the Supreme Court's opinion, I want to review what we've covered so far. In the court's decision that would affect millions of families, the court did not even consider when life begins. What if we did that in a natural disaster? What about 9/11 as a prime example? After 9/11 happened, what would you think if someone says, well, we can't speculate if there's any survivors under all that rubble? Yet not to even consider any evidence that would prove that life before live birth, to me, is just poor, biased judgment. If one is denied the right to life based on the fact that someone else considers it a right to privacy, to me that's a horrible mindset. A parent that would abuse a kid every night at home is not a right to privacy, but a mindset that should not be tolerated. Now, concerning whether a fetus can survive outside the womb is like saying that someone that was in a head-on collision that would need a couple months in intensive care must be released the next day from the hospital. Finally, the court contradicts itself by saying that life does not begin until live birth, and then asks if the fetus can survive outside the womb, and thus proves they have improperly judged the matter. For someone would have to be alive first before one could say they can survive outside the womb. Think about it. In order to survive or remain alive, one would have to be alive first before one could survive. By the way, a bald eagle is not a person, yet has more rights than an unborn child, which leads us to the final point of the court's decision. Only a person has rights. Now, according to the dictionary, the definition of a person is a human being, whether an adult or child. Yet when it comes to the topic of abortion, the definition seems to be quite different. For if the Supreme Court went by the common definition of human beings, then the court could not allow the mother to kill her own child. So in turn, a legal definition of what a person is had to be developed. This is the core of the debate. If the unborn child is a person, then the case for women's right to kill her own child is no longer valid, according to the Supreme Court. Quote, if this suggestion of personhood is established, the appellate case, of course, collapses, for the fetus right to life would be guaranteed, specified by the amendment. Now, if anyone can make up their own definition of personhood, then that leads to the question, why should any person accept it? After all, Jews and blacks have been considered non-persons. This can lead to deciding a certain class or type of human that does not have rights. Until there's a proper concept of the right of life, then all other rights will be seen through a distorted lens. So, the fact that one may view human beings as two classes solely for the benefit to kill one of the unwanted classes is pretty frightening to me. To me, some human beings can be killed at any time and for any reason by the mother, then any one of us may become the next target. Yet, in general, the majority of pro-choice supporters would agree that once there is live birth, the child now has a right to life. So the moment before the baby leaves the mother's womb, the baby does not have a right to live, even though it's fully functional, heartbeat, etc., can be killed. But once the baby is born, it has attained the right to live. Think of it this way. The baby's in the womb, like living in North Korea, live birth that's now in South Korea. Yet consider the bald eagle is protected while they are still in the egg. How is an animal given the right to life that a human being is denied until birth? The definition of personhood is not set in stone and does not vary from person to person. Now, I'm going to list the 5 most common qualifications of personhood before someone claims a baby has a right to live. But why should we even accept their definition? There should be a right to life because of who we are and not how we function. After all, that's the way it is with the bald eagle. Even a human being should have at least the value of a bald eagle, shouldn't it? Does that mean that when a person loses any of their functions, they are no longer possess the right to live? And yet now the argument today is a baby can be born in New York, for example, and the mother can still kill it. That's going beyond what it was before. Does that mean when one of these functions are no longer present, that a human being is no longer a person, and thus could be taken out like the trash? So here are the qualifications in order to have the right to life according to pro-choice supporter. Notice there's no convincing argument as to why one must function in all these areas in order to have rights. The bald eagle is not a person. There's nothing that would forfeit its right to life, even if they are still in the egg, and they will never become a person. They are protected for who they are and not how they function. Did not Jesus say we are worth more than many sparrows? Apparently, Planned Parenthood sees things a lot differently than Jesus, who is the creator of us all. If the right of life is based on some or all of these, then do you support the killing of a 6-month-old baby? And here's why. At the time of the writing of the Constitution, did the Founding Fathers also hold the same viewpoint? If not, then the right to life is not consistent by an ever-changing society. Thus, the right to life in the 1700s would be different than today. If that is the case, then the right to life is not based on the Constitution, but what the culture says at any given time. This can lead to society saying that at 80, one is no longer has a right to live, and they must die. So, first of all, consciousness. Well, it is well recognized that infants have no awareness of their own state, emotions, and motivations. All parents also notice an important change at around 2 years of age when children manifest self-consciousness. Without reasoning, at 6, but most likely 7 years old, they develop a conscience and are able to reason. Until then, enjoy your passionate 3-year-old and rest assured that understanding logical connections and family rules is a skill he will gradually sharpen over the next few years. What about being self-motivated? Now, some teenagers, I'll be honest with you, even have a hard time with that. Or to communicate on a number of topics. I don't even need a source for that. Some adults still can't do that. Babies are not even saying their first words yet, never mind a conversation of different topics at once. And to be self-aware. Well, that's at about the 15th to the 24th month. Although a newborn's lack self-awareness, as the quote says. So out of these 5 qualifications, even a 6-month-old baby would not pass the test. Now, I do briefly want to mention about life support. There is a place for it. However, if a person is only alive, meaning their body and organs, by life support, then life support would only prevent a person from naturally decaying. I don't see this as a contradiction. A premature baby may be on life support until a certain point in which the baby can function on its own. Someone in a car accident could recover at some point. It is when the body cells no longer are able to reproduce that the only thing life support does is prevent the body from decaying. It is when we should consider to let nature have its course. That the woman's right is absolute and that she is entitled to terminate her pregnancy at whatever time, in whatever way, and for whatever reason she chooses. To me, this is one of the greatest forms of injustice you will ever see. I want you to consider the following according to the Constitution. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with rights. So, how can that be if the woman's so-called right to an abortion is absolute over the rights of all others? If you consider all the rights that are listed by the Founding Fathers, the one thing that is for certain is the right that can be forfeited by the individual when you break certain laws. Why is it the so-called right that is not even mentioned by the Founding Father the only right that's absolute? Think about that. Abortion, it's not mentioned in the Constitution, but that's the only right that can't be forfeited. It's absolute. Doesn't make sense. How did the judges use the Constitution to come to that conclusion? If the Founding Fathers meant for abortion to be an absolute right, then they would have mentioned it. To me, this is the biggest question concerning this topic. In review, the key to remember is that those that support abortion do not value the unborn. As long as the mindset of the unborn of abortion that the unborn is like an ingrown toenail will not even consider that they were in the same position at some point when they were in the womb, and yet their holier than thou stance on why abortion is a right. Abortion is not only treats the unborn in human way, but it is the mindset that's inhuman. Jesus said you can judge a tree by its fruit. The mindset of abortion is like the weeds that can destroy a beautiful garden. With that being said, I hope you watch my remaining videos on the issue of abortion.